As I said, today we are talking about TD Snap with a focus on core first scanning. My name is Jessica Kennedy and I am the Queensland rep with Link Assistive, and I am also a speech pathologist. And so this webinar is aiming to give you that overview of the core first scanning page set that's available within the TD Snap software. So TD Snap is the latest software from Tobii Dynavox, and it is available on a range of different hardware options that include both iOS and Windows platforms. So you can use TD Snap on a standard iPad or standard Windows 10 tablet, and it is also available on Tobii Dynavox's full range of dedicated devices, including the Indie, i110, as well as the iGaze iSeries as well. So the Snap software has a range of page sets that are available, and today we're going to be focusing on the core first scanning page set. So there are webinars that have either been done already or that are coming up focused on each of these page sets individually, as well as just an overview of the TD Snap software settings and editing as well. So if you'd like to learn more about any of those, then head to the Link Assistive website, and there's a link at the bottom of the screen here as well to show you where that is on our website. So setting up a switch solution for somebody is very complex, and we're often considering switch access for our clients who have some of the most complex needs to begin with. So we're already sort of juggling quite a lot of different things. And for this reason, it's almost always a team effort, and we want to integrate quite a number of things. And this visual just aims to give you a bit of a broad and general overview of the key components that are going to be coming together into a switch solution. So that includes vocabulary organization, scan options and settings, your switch type, switch positioning, posture and positioning of the person themselves, as well as then implementation, so teaching and modeling somebody to be using switching. So obviously that is a very broad scope, and today's presentation is really going to focus on just the vocabulary option and the scan options and settings piece of this whole big puzzle. And that's because software selection is really critical for what you're considering for vocabulary and scan options and settings. We also obviously need to then find, the switch type and positioning, consider the posture and positioning of the person, and then look at that teaching and modeling piece. So we won't be covering those aspects today, but at the end of the presentation, we do have a number of different links to some really great resources around each of those different components. And today we'll just be focusing on vocabulary organization and scan options and settings, and what that can look like within the TD Snap software. So first things first is the vocabulary features. And the vocabulary features of the core first scanning page set are basically quite similar to what you'll find in the core first language organization. So basically core first scanning is just a modified version of that core first page set. So it maintains a lot of the key features of core first in terms of that evidence base and the tools and things that you can use, but then adjusts things to optimize use for people who are scanning and using switches. So if you want any more detailed information about the background, evidence and features of core first itself, then I'd encourage you to go back and watch the webinar that was presented by my colleague Amy Litton. That's up on our website, and she goes into depth about that, but I'll just give you a super quick overview just in case you aren't familiar with core first. So Tobii Dynavox has basically integrated the evidence base around organization of tools and content into core first. So They've based it on the sort of 3 core goals of the app, which are engagement, growth, and literacy, because we know that these are the 3 key components that people need in order to be competent communicators. They also listen to a lot of feedback from caregivers and communication partners and really tried to have a focus on making the software easy to use with simple setup, editing, searching, and syncing features. So basically the core first page set aims to integrate a range of tools that allows a person access to precise and efficient communication, while being able to easily move between the different tools depending on their preferences and the communication context that they're in. So Core First will give you access to core words, which we know are that small set of frequently used words that make up the majority of our sentences, as well as word lists that give us access to that fringe vocabulary, and a keyboard as well for really precise communication. But then Core First also allows you access to sort of chunked and sentences, organized vocabulary in the form of those topics and quick fires, which are there to really maximize efficiency. Then there's a few tools in between that kind of help to balance those things out. So it's aiming to give access to a range of different communication tools that you can move between quickly and easily, just depending on preferences and context and situation. So as I mentioned, Core First scanning is based on all of those principles of Core First, but then they've made a number of adjustments to optimize that layout for scanners. So we'll go through what those different adjustments are. So what's included in Core First scanning? Well, firstly, there are 4 grid sizes ranging from 12 to 72 cells per page. And they also have some learn to scan pages as well that are basically 2 smaller grid sizes designed for early scanners. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later on. And the way that they've adjusted the Core First page set the Core First scanning page set to make it different to Core First is that they've basically aimed to improve the efficiency of the organization to reduce the number of scan steps that are needed to get to our most common words. So basically our vocabulary within Core First scanning is organized by frequency of use because we're aiming to reduce the number of steps and switch selections that someone needs to get to the words that they're going to use most often. So they've done that partially by reducing the size of the word list. So you'll have smaller word lists within Core First scanning to limit that scrolling. They've also adjusted the word lists so that they're ordered by frequency rather than alphabetically. And the other main feature is that they have already built in logical scan groups to those standard pages. So they are chunking vocabulary by word type and function. And that aims to improve efficiency because you're only sort of likely to need 1 word from each word group in order to construct a sentence. So it's just kind of trying to chunk vocabulary together to make things more efficient. You can customize those groups, and we'll talk a little bit about what that can look like when we talk about group scanning as well. So that sort of summarizes the key features of Core First scanning in terms of vocabulary. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the scan options that are available within TD Snap. So just note that these scan options and settings can apply across any of the page sets that are available within TD Snap. So they're built in and optimized already for scanners in Core First scanning, but you can use these settings and options within any of the page sets. So if you've got somebody that would benefit from the text page set or the aphasia page set or the pod page set, you can add these scan options and settings within all of those page sets as well because they're features of the TD Snap software itself. So as just a quick overview, the first scan option that you've got is thinking about the scan pattern, so the way that the software is going to scan through the different options. And TD Snap gives you 3 different options for scan patterns. So you can scan through your vocabulary in a linear fashion, and that's where each item is scanned individually from left to right and top to bottom. So this is a good option for pages with smaller numbers of cells and options, and will often be used for people who are new to scanning, because it is slower, but it is less cognitively demanding. And this is also a scan pattern that might be required for somebody who might be relying on some auditory cues, and is not able to use their vision in their scanning. You can also scan through your options by row column or column row. So that's where the scan will go through each row. When you get to the row that you want, it will scan through each item in that row individually, or it will scan through each column. When you get to the column that you want, it will scan through each item individually. So this increases the efficiency of the scan because you kind of get through more options more quickly, but it does also increase the complexity and the cognitive demand of the scan as well. And finally, you can scan through in groups. So this is where there are predefined groups that are scanned as a single unit. And then when you select that group, it will scan through each item in that group individually. So that kind of chunks vocabulary, and it can increase the speed and efficiency of the scan as well. The other benefit of using a group scan option is that you can set auditory cues for the different groups. So rather than having to hear each option individually, you might be able to hear an auditory cue for a group of things. So like people words, action words, question words, that kind of thing. The next option that you need to consider is the scan type. And so that is, how and when you're going to use your switches to make a selection. And I am just going to switch over to show you a bit of a video demo of what each of the different scan types look like within TD Snap. So this video is going to give an overview, as I said, of the scan types that are available within TD Snap. There are 5 different scan types, and this video is going to demonstrate each of these. So to change your scan type, the first thing that you'll do is open your settings menu, which is the cog and pencil in the top right-hand corner of the screen.
Yes, the video is not showing.
Oh, sorry, guys. Hang on. Let me just try resharing.
Yep, that's good.
Better? Okay, thanks, Shah. We'll just jump back. Okay. So as I said, there's 5 scan types. What you'll do to change them is open your settings menu, go into your user tab, into your access method menu, and then you'll see the third option down. The second option down is that scan type. And there are the 5 scan type options in here. So so we'll go through them one by one and see what they each look like. So the first scan type is a one-switch auto scan, and this is where the scan progresses automatically when you press your switch. And when you get to the one you want, you hit your switch to choose that one. So you can customize how quickly the scan moves along, and you just play around with how quickly you need that to move along to be the right fit for the person that you're working with. So you can see my switches in the corner there. You can see I'm not making any selections on any switches, but the scan block is moving along and progressing automatically. When it gets to the one that I want, I will hit my switch, and that will make a selection. Then it's going to scan through each of the options within that group until I get the one that I want, and then I make another selection. So the next scan type is a 2-switch step scan. So that's where we use one switch to move the scan along and the other switch to make a selection. So we will just have to switch that scan type over. and you will be able to see what that looks like. So you'll see this time the scan isn't progressing because I'm not making any selections on any of those switches. So the scan block is just staying where it is there. When I'm ready to start scanning, I will use one switch to move that scan along. And when I get to the one that I want, I'll use my other switch to select. So we'll move the scan along. And then when we get to the one we want, we'll use the other switch to choose. So move, 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 and choose. So the one switch auto scan and two switch step scanning are probably the two most commonly used scan types, but there are three more customized options within the Tobii Snap software as well. So the first option that we'll look at is a one switch scan. And so that's where you use one switch for two different functions. And the way that you'll do that is you'll change how you press on the switch. So a short press will move your scan along, and a hold on the switch will make a selection. So this can be a really good option for people who benefit from that idea of step scanning, but you can only find one switch location. From a physical access perspective, there might only be one movement that they've got really good control over. You can change that hold time as well, so you can change how long you need the person to hold down on the switch for it to be counted as a selection. So we'll have a little bit of a look at what that looks like. So you'll see again that the scan isn't moving along because I'm not making any selections on my switches here. But when I'm ready to start scanning, I'll do short presses. And when I get to the one I want, I'll hold down a bit longer, and that will make a selection. So we'll do quick press, and hold down to select. So the next scan type option is one switch dwell scanning. So this is where you press the switch to move the scan along, and then you pause and you don't make a selection on your switch to make a selection on the screen. So you're essentially dwelling on a group or a button, and that makes a selection. So as with all the other options, you can change that dwell time. So you can change how long you have to pause and not hit your switch for to make a selection. But this can be a good option for somebody who, again, only has one switch site, but might have really good control of timing of the switch. So you can see I'm pressing and I stop pressing and it selects. So you select your switch to move, and you hold and pause to select. So just, a few different options that you've got for those people you might be working with that would benefit from a step scanning approach to give them access to more language and things like that, but you're just limited from a physical access perspective around a movement that you can find that the person's got control over. So the last scan type that we'll look at is called inverse scanning. So in this scan type, what you'll do is you'll hold down on your switch, and when you get to the one that you want, you'll release, and that release will make the selection. So this can be a good option for someone who's maybe got really good control over the release component of the switch movement rather than the select component of the switch movement. So we'll have a look at what that looks like. So you can see, hopefully I'm holding down on that switch, and when it gets to the one that I want, I release, and that will make the selection. So I'll hold down on the switch and release to make my selection. Cool. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview and a bit of a visual representation of what each of those scan patterns look like. So, as I said, group scanning is if you select a group scanning option, you're able to add some further customization to these scan patterns because you can create custom groups for scanning. So that's possible across all the TD Snap page sets. So you can do this, like I said, across the text, aphasia, pod page sets if you need to. So just a few little tips for that. So make sure your access method again is set to scanning, make sure group scanning is turned on, and this is where you can add some custom auditory cues as well. So I'm actually just going to switch across into TD Snap software for a second, just to show you what that looks like. So we'll go, into our settings menu, into our user, access method, and scanning. And we can see that that is set to scanning. When I go into my scan behaviors, I'm just checking that group scanning is switched on. Then to make customizations to these group scans, I go into my page options, and you can see that we've got this scan groups option third down here on the right hand side. And when I select that, it gives you a bit of a visual of how the group scans have been customized within this Core First scanning page set. So you can see what they've done is grouped by word function within Core First scanning. So we've got our people words in a pink group, our action words in a green group, our little words in an orange group, question words in a blue group, and our word lists in a pink group. And you can see that they've also customized these auditory cues as well. So to edit or change the groups, what you would do is you would select from each of the groups down at the bottom here using the colored circles. And then once you're in a group, if you wanted to add a word to a group, you would just select any of the symbols that you wanted to add into that group. You could erase any words that you don't want in that group, or you could delete an entire group as well if you wanted to do that. Then if you wanted to change the auditory cue, you just go down to the bottom here and you would type an alternative auditory cue in here. So you can see the fact that this has already been done for you in Core First scanning across all of the pages within that Core First scanning page set has saved a lot of time in customizing and creating efficiency for a scanner. But like I said, if you needed to use a different page set or wanted to make any other changes, you can do that by editing your scan groups within TD Snap as well. Okay, so that summarizes our scan options. And lastly, we're going to just quickly run through scan settings that you can change. So these are, just all different settings that you can customize to make TD Snap Core First scanning as suitable for your scanner as possible. So some different things that you can change are things like scan behaviors. So that was the menu within TD Snap where you could change your scan pattern and turn group scanning on. And as well as that, the other scan behaviors that you can modify are the number of passes. So, how many times is it going to scan through all of your options before it stops? And then when it stops, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to go back to the home page, or do you just want it to stop scanning completely? So that's something that you can change. You can choose to turn scan from last selection on. So you can choose if you'd like it to continue scanning from where you last selected, or if you'd like it to go back to the top of the page once you've made a selection. You can choose whether you'd like the scan to include the top bar. So that's this bar at the very top of the page with your back button, home button, dashboard, search and settings and things like that. So you can either scan that or skip scanning that, depending on what works better for the person you're working with. And you can choose whether or not to scan blank buttons or whether to just skip over them because there isn't any content in them. So they're the sorts of settings that you can modify within scan behaviors. Another setting that you might want to play around with is highlighting. So this is the visual feedback around where the scan is up to. So having some options within the highlighting settings can be really useful for people who might have low or complex and fluctuating vision, where there might be certain colors or certain contrasts that make it easier for the person to see. And so your highlighting options within TD Snap are an outline. So that's what you would have seen in the videos. It's just an outline around all of the cells, and you can change the color and the thickness of that outline as well. Otherwise, you might like to choose an overlay. So that's where a color sort of highlights over the top of a whole cell, and you can adjust that color as well. Or you might like to choose invert highlighting, which is where the software will automatically kind of select a contrasting color and invert those colors when that area is being scanned. And we know that those contrasting colors can be quite helpful for people with CVI. So that might be something that you want to explore. There is also the option to zoom in. And so what that will do is that will bring the cell that you're scanning across out into quite a large size so that it might be easier to see. If you're doing a linear scan, then each cell that's being scanned through will come up in that large size. If you've got a group scanning on, then it'll just be the first symbol in that group will zoom and become large. So that's just a setting that can be toggled on in settings. And yet that can again be useful for people with low vision as an option. If you're working with someone who has no functional vision and is going to be relying on auditory feedback for scanning, then there's a few different things that you can adjust within TD Snap as well. So you can turn auditory feedback or auditory cues on, and that will then read aloud the label of the cell that's being scanned or the label for the group that's being scanned. You can adjust the feedback voice so that the person has a different scanning voice to their speaking voice, and you can customize that voice in terms of pronunciation and accent and things like that. You can also direct that feedback voice through a different audio output device. So for example, you could connect some Bluetooth headphones or a speaker and have the auditory cues go through that extra auditory device, audio device, and then have the speaking voice come out through the person's communication device so that the communicator is hearing their cues, but their communication partner is only hearing their selections. So that can be really a useful feature as well. So you do that by changing the audio feedback output device there. And you can also turn selection feedback sound on. And so that will give the person an auditory cue, like a click when they select a button that doesn't actually have a word on it. So like if they select a navigational button or a scroll button, they'll be able to hear a click to at least know that they've made a selection. So that can be handy as well. And there are also settings that can be helpful for people if you're looking at some physical kind of access considerations and selection accommodations. So they're things like adding a hold time or a delay between selections. So a hold time is how long does a switch need to be pressed for it to be accepted as a switch. And that can be really useful if you've got someone who has a tremor or is getting some accidental brief selections. You might want to add a hold time so that they have to hold down and have a really intentional switch in order to make a selection. Similarly, delay between selections asks TD Snap to ignore any switches for a set period of time after they've made a selection. So that again is useful for somebody who might have a bit of a tremor, who hits the switch a few times in a row. So you can just ask the software to accept the first switch and then ignore the repeated ones afterwards. So just a couple of things to note. So in some of those more customized scan patterns that we talked about earlier, like the one switch scanning and the dwell scanning and inverse scanning, I said that you could adjust the length of time. You needed to hold the switch or dwell or release for the switch selection to be counted. So that actually needs to be done through a setting called pause time settings, which is underneath your access method options rather than in this scan setting. So it's just in a slightly different place. And another note is just that often people want to add that delay between selection when a person's kind of repeatedly hitting the switch to make a selection. And they might be doing that not so much from, a physical tremor, but maybe more of a learned behavior kind of thing. And just a tip for that, we'd sort of recommend maybe adding a hold time in that circumstance, because what we want the person to do is learn to make a deliberate and intentional switch press. So we want them to learn that switch, hold, release sort of motor pattern of intentional switch selection rather than just asking the system to accommodate for that. So maybe try that hold time accommodation first and see how they go with that. And the last quick little tool that's available is a pause button. So you can add a pause button into that top bar, and that allows the communication partner to just pause and stop the scan at any time. And obviously the switch user would have access to pausing the scan as well if they've got scanning of that top bar enabled. And as I mentioned briefly, the other feature of Core First Scanning is this Learn to Scan tool. So you can find this within the dashboard of the Core First Scanning pages. And the Learn to Scan pages are basically just two different grid size options, a 2x3 and a 3x3 grid size that are just a series of topic choice boards created for motivating activities like music, games, and sensory experiences. And the idea is that you'd set up a linear scan, turn off the message toolbar and group scanning options, and just have some simple early introduction to scanning resources readily available for you, already built into the Core First Scanning page set. And Tobii Dynavox also has a really useful tool, which is the implementation guide that's available freely on their website. And that summarizes all of this information that we've gone through in the session today as well. So, scanning is a very big topic. Hopefully we've given a little bit of an introduction into how TD Snap and the Core First Scanning page set might be useful for some of your scan users. But just got a number of different support resources that you might like to go away and have a look at to learn more about scanning as a topic in general. So Tobii Dynavox has some really nice resources. As I mentioned, they've got an implementation guide for the Core First Scanning pages. And they've also done a scanning webinar series that looks more at that switch type and switch positioning and implementation pieces that we sort of mentioned briefly but didn't delve into today. Linda Burkhart is an amazing resource for your implementation, teaching and modelling piece. So she's got some great resources available on her website and on YouTube. Indigo has done a great resource around developing switch skills as well, as has the ACE Centre UK, AbleNet. So there's lots of information around there. So lots for you to go away and have a look at there. But if you do have any questions about the TD Snap software, hardware, switch options that are available, then please do get in contact with us at Link Assistive. So you can call us, you can email us, head to our website, check out our Facebook page, sign up to our newsletter to get updates and things like that. We're always more than happy to assist you and answer any questions that you might have. Excellent. So I will just stop the recording.